Thaddeus Dixon has entered the transfer portal.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports is Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. New customers can bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Lars, we got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers today. We're going to be talking about some basketball. You and I are just getting back from Washington's matchup with Illinois. We're going to talk about that game and just kind of the overall, since the last time we got a chance to really catch up on Danny Sprinkle's team. We're talking about some roster movement like Peter Langi, who has decided to back off his commitment to Washington. A couple of the moves in that regard. That was how we were planning to lead the show. And then, Lars, while we were sitting there at the game, Thaddeus Dixon entered the transfer portal. And we've seen a lot of things going around on Twitter. A lot of things. I'm going to make this very, very clear right now. This is not about money. That's it. Like, that's the end of that discussion. We're not having it because that's it. It's not about money.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was going to try and play that card just for, giggles, just to kind of be the protagonist, the antagonist to your protagonist. But no, it's not. It has nothing to do with potential resources or, UW being out of funds and any situation like that. It's not. It's a matter of Jacario is coming in to play a position that Thad currently occupies. Until 2 weeks ago, Thaddeus wasn't even going to come back. That had 0 point. There was not a non-zero chance he was coming back. There was a 0.0 chance until the Pabila ruling allowed JUCO guys to get an extra year. And I think at this point, you're even looking at it, and you're John Richardson and you're Ryan Walters, and you're saying, okay, as much as we like Thad, we have so many young guys in this room that we have to keep bringing along. And at some point, when you bring in Jacario, it's why Elijah Jackson left. Like, the snaps are not going to be there. And at some point, you have to trench it because otherwise, Caleb Presley leaves, somebody else leaves. And it's like, well, you'd rather keep the 2 or 3 year guy than have another year. And I say that knowing it's like that's probably why Thaddeus wanted to find out what he could get in the portal.
Right. Well, that's part of it. Where I'm really glad you started with the junior college ruling, because that's a big part of this. Where when Washington staff is making these offseason plans, when Tacario Davis entered the transfer portal, it was very clear that, like, hey, we talked about it on this show. This is this might be their top overall target. Like, you need defensive line, you need offensive line. Those are the most important needs. But with the level of player Tacario is, if he's the number 1 overall target, that's not shocking. Now, as we record this right now, full disclosure, it is Sunday, January 5th at 5:50 p.m. We just saw a report from Matt Zenitz that Tacario Davis is still expected to transfer to Washington. He has not made an official announcement yet. So, yeah, I know, shocker, right? So we're not talking about that part of this right now, but it certainly plays a factor. And on top of that, it doesn't seem like he wants to move inside. He doesn't want to play the nickel, which he prides himself on being a physical, aggressive corner on the boundary. Every corner wants to play on the boundary. And this is something where, you and I have had discussions about this on and off the air where, hey, if Tacario does come in, do you move somebody like that to the nickel? He is liking replies on Twitter saying, I don't want to move inside. He is replying to people saying, I don't want to move inside. Like, that's that should be the end of this discussion. And it's obviously an unfortunate loss. We're not trying to sugarcoat that. We're not trying to say, hey, this is okay for X, Y, and Z reason. We're just telling you this is why it happened. And on top of that, again, as you said, with the junior college ruling, they didn't expect him to be on the roster. So this is now a scholarship where it's like, yeah, we'd love to keep you because you're a great talent and we love the way you worked under John Richardson in this defense this year. But at the same point in time, we know that we can go out and acquire an elite talent, and we're trying to make this all work. It doesn't seem like a return is completely out of the question here, but this is the thing where why not at least step in the door, see what it has to offer, and you can figure it out from there at the same point.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of guys that have that extra JUCO, actually, has benefited from that. CJ Christian, same sort of thing, where he was like, hey, I didn't know until, I entered kind of late, coach got fired and all these sorts of things. And if you're Thad, basically what you're looking at if you're Thaddeus Dixon is saying, okay, I have this offer and this package to come back to. This is what I know I'm going to get at UW. Okay, they want me to be in the slot. I guess we can't say that verbatim, but let's just assume that Richardson had said, hey, if you want to come back, you got to move into the slot. That's just because if Jakaria comes in, that's just what it has to be. There's no way Thad's going to say, oh, I'll go from 500, 600 snaps down to like 250 behind Jakaria. Like, that's not going to happen. And you're maxing his value. And so I'm sure Thad knows what he would get from NIL from UW. So he's going to take that and say, can I find a better situation next year that appeases me more? That's all this is. And it's not a monetary thing saying, oh, UW can only offer me this and NIL and so this other school. It's like, I don't think it's going to be an outbidding situation. It's going to be somebody saying to Thad, a Power 4 school preferably, and I don't think it's going to be a Big 10 school, but I would probably say ACC, maybe Big 12, whatever you want to call it, will say, if he decides to stay in college, if he decides to stay in college and use that extra year elsewhere besides Washington, he's going to say, I'm only doing it as an outside cornerback. He's not going to go to another school and be Mish Powell and go move to safety or move to nickel and that sort of thing. It's like, look, Mish got to do that because he served his time, led UW, didn't single-handedly lead UW to a championship. Although the ASU game does need to always get a shout-out. So, again, had a significant role. So he was allowed to go and have that last year somewhere else, and he capitalized perfectly on it. Thad could do that as well. Like, if he ends up, I know Miami just got the Wazoo kid at quarterback, so I don't think that he would be a destination there. But if you can find a similar path like that, where if you can make a top 25 team as an outside cornerback, cool, go for it. That's what you want to do. Go for it. Nobody will fault you for that, and it has 0.0 to do with money. Because whatever that other school offers you, whether it's more or less than what you'd be getting at UW, they could just be saying, well, hey, because he's an outside P1 quarterback, we should pay him X number versus what he would have got at the nickel as a starter and those sorts of things. But it's not money that's the issue. It's not money that's the deciding factor. It's, why, as you said, do I want to play inside or do I want to play outside? Part of me thinks Ryan Walters could also have a convincing angle on this once he gets to build a relationship with Thaddeus, because keep in mind, he's got a good relationship with Richardson, but he has no clue in terms of who he actually is, who Ryan Walters is. So if he's able to build that connection, take some visits and things like that, like, there's certain guys where you're taking visits and then you're quickly ending up in another school. Jordan Shaw. I think Thaddeus, this will be an interesting 72 hours, let's call it, between now that he entered the portal on Sunday and what happens by Tuesday. Does he start scheduling visits? Does he say, you know what, actually, I want to go to the NFL. I'm not really getting calls, but I also don't want to go to the slot.
Sure.
And the other answer is that there's only three options. It's other school, NFL, UW in the slot.
Yeah.
That's
it. You're right. And I think of this from the slot angle. That's what I've been thinking about this whole time with this, where he is a guy who has prided himself on playing on the boundary because he's done it his entire time here. He did it in junior college. And it's one of those things where I feel that some cornerbacks, and I'm not just saying this about Thaddeus specifically, but some corners see it as a downgrade to move into the slot. I personally disagree with that sentiment. I think that it's a really fun, versatile position that's really important in the NFL. Like, that's one of the most important parts of this is NFL teams will certainly value players who can play inside and out a little bit higher, especially with the Thad's tackling ability, his ability to play against the run, everything like that. But if he says, no, I want to bet on myself, which, as you and I know, that's the kind of kid that Thaddeus is. He's somebody who wants to bet on himself, and he says, I want to go be a number one corner and do that somewhere else because I want to make sure I can play exclusively on the boundary and do this and that. The third thing, that is way more likely. That is way more, and that's where all the tea leaves are pointing. It's what you and I have heard, but outside of that, it's out there in the public eye if you're looking in the right place. But Lars, that's not the only roster movement that we need to talk about, which we'll get to right after a message from our friends over at FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. A couple of bets that I really like. One, FanDuel's got some Super Bowl matchups on there. Give me Lions coming out of the NFC and the Buffalo Bills coming out of the AFC. I think that'd be a really fun Super Bowl matchup. You can go check out all those odds and so many more by just visiting FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Lars, one of the more interesting, I can't really call it a transfer, but just developments, I would say, over the last couple of weeks, is somebody who you and I talked about a few weeks ago when he committed. Offensive lineman Peter Langi has decided to back off his commitment to Washington, where you read some of the comments that he had, where he's like, I really wasn't feeling it. Brandon Huffman's already put in a crystal ball for him to end up choosing Arizona. And it's this is an interesting one where I think this is like this is a case where, let's say he ends up in Arizona, where he wants to play with one of his teammates who's committed there in the 2025 class and his younger brother who's committed there in the 2026 class. So I think that's a big factor in this. And long-term, where Washington still has 15 scholarship offensive linemen as of this moment, as of when we're recording this. And on top of that, Washington's still over the scholarship limit. So obviously you don't want to see a true freshman, especially somebody with his size and his just level of physicality, going out the door. But there are going to be guys leaving this roster. Thaddeus Dixon is not the last person who's going to enter the transfer portal. We might not see it right now because we're getting towards the end of that 5-day portal window that guys have at the end of their bowl game. But we're going to see it in the spring because Jedd Fisch has talked about being at, or he said they're staying at 85 scholarships, but he said we might not be there in the spring. We might have a true NFL style competition and guys are going to play their way into spots. He's been very blunt about that.
Yeah, I mean, I can see a situation where you look at some of those younger linemen, redshirt freshmen, redshirt sophomores that are competing with the freshmen, and if they're number 2 or 3 on the depth chart at their position, those are going to be the spots where you're going to have to lose, and that's why the freshmen are so important. But I also, in a way, as you were saying, it's like, yeah, you don't want to lose a freshman. But to me, it's also like, well, let's say if you trade and again, I'm not going to use any specific names here, but if you trade 2 offensive linemen for 1 senior right guard starter,
sure,
as a scholarship number, you're making that trade 10 out of 10 times. And I'm not going to, if you lose Peter Langi, but if you lose Peter Langi and let's say 1 other offensive lineman, not in the 2 deeps, and you gain, so you lose 2 scholarship linemen, but you gain, let's say, a DJ Wingfield. That is a trade that you made for 2025.
DJ Wingfield's already made a commitment. I was going to bring up. No, hold on. That's the guy. Right, and that's where I wanted to make sure I brought up this name, and that's Emmanuel Pregnon from USC, where that's the kind of kid where, we talked about Falile Fa'amoe, who ended up at Wake Forest. Interesting choice. Just going to leave that out there. But you look at somebody like Pregnon and you say, hey, that's another elite talent that you could add to this room that be a really great fit along this offensive line. You find a way to make the numbers work. So I bring that up to say, if we see another lineman leave, but you're able to bring in somebody like that, it's a fair trade-off for 1 season. And that's something you can live with for the short term, because if you trust whoever it is, John Mills, Champ Talele, whoever it is long-term, to develop and become part of the rotation, Paki Finau just being a name that is a must in this conversation, then it's something that you can live with. Again, it's not great because these are things that are going to happen.
Exactly. And it's like, and again, you never want to lose anybody, especially good talent, but I'd honestly rather lose a freshman knowing how many guys they brought in at that position than I would an upper class, like a guy that had been starting. And those, like, if you're losing, and again, guard's already out the door, but if you're losing a guy with starting experience versus a guy who hasn't played yet, it's like, well, you always want to keep the experienced guy because as we saw this season, you can play some inexperienced guys, but you're not going to always have the same result.
Right. But let's also put it this way though. Right now, because I like your point, but I just want to push back a little bit because I think you're right. But right now, Washington is at a net -1 in terms of bodies because guard Memolar is gone, or I mean, net -2 actually. Guard Memolar is gone. Enoch Vimahai is out of eligibility. You got D'Angelo Titali out the door, and then you've also seen Kaylee Tafai leave, and then you've only brought in the 2 guys from the transfer portal, plus a bunch of true freshmen. I don't think the majority, if any of them, are going to end up seeing the field this year. So right now you're in the net negative in terms of bodies, but it also is something where you're still trying to find ways to make the roster work, as we just said a minute ago. So if you want to recruit the 2026 class as hard as you did in 2025 along the offensive line and find 1-year stopgaps like Gieran Hatchett is going to be, whether he starts or is part of the rotation, like Carver Willis is going to be, it's livable and you can find a way to make it work.
Exactly. I think that's the key, is just getting the amount of varied bodies in the room. Like I know we've seen people on Twitter, because I'm sure you've had it in your mention, where it's like, well, how could you count on Gieran to be a starter? He also started at center and then got injured at Oklahoma, so he hasn't really had a full season as a starter. And it's like, no, I get that. But you still want a guy with power forward experience who can play the position and multiple positions for that matter. I think that's the other side of this coin is, we know how much Brendan Carroll loves his, versatile offensive linemen.
Yep.
really, I think any football coach loves versatility, because if you can play two positions, that's two scholarships in one. That's what you're looking for. But in this situation, you're really kind of just looking, because I firmly agree. Like, that's what I'm thinking. They're going to bank most of it for the 26 class, but you still need, as we look at the roster right now, and the offensive line right now, you still need one more guy. Like, you have to go get one more, whether it's a left guard or a right guard. And I think, there's a couple of other guys that have entered the portal, and, we'll see. Because, again, guys can enter the portal up until a certain point, but they can stay in the portal and sign and commit whenever. You can commit February, March, whenever, up until, I would assume, spring ball, because at that point you want to find a home pretty soon and get ready to go into a program. Because we saw, Enoch and D'Angelo, and I think, wasn't there a third? Yeah, Max, were all added in that June or in that April window. And then you had to shotgun it in the fall. And so it's like, as much as coaches want to say, hey, like, we want just the spring portal, it's like, no, you don't. You really don't. You really don't. And I know why you're saying it, because it's like, academically, we'll bring them in the summer. It's a lot easier on the calendar. It's like, that's the easy cop-out. Doing it the right way is doing it probably between January. Point being, you need to go get one more guy. And I think, whoever ends up being, it's going to be a guy, whether we've talked about him or not, that does have starting experience. I think that's clearly what they're going for.
So we could say the same thing on the defensive line. You got to kind of switch gears here, where Jayden Wayne, former highly touted recruit, spent 1 year at Miami, spent 1 year at Washington, is in the transfer portal again. Lars, Washington has lost 3 members of this edge room so far this offseason in the transfer portal. Obviously, Voice Newfie's had eligibility as well. But you bring in Taitai Uyunglele, and this is, I don't necessarily think it's a like-for-like take in terms of getting Taitai and then losing Jayden Wayne. But I think it's just really interesting, the way this edge room is shaping up, because a name we've kind of thrown out there to our insiders to keep an eye on that I'm really interested in, I think is a great talent, is UNLV edge rusher Fisher K-Mac, who I don't want to get into too much right now, because I think that the bigger discussion around this is fans are just disappointed to see a former highly touted fringe top 100 local recruit leave.
Yeah, and it's understandable, but also, it was kind of a, shock that he did come back, because there wasn't any like specific draw. Like, the coaches that he had at Miami, nobody was at UW, and everybody that was at UW when he went to Miami initially is gone. Like, it was Kalen DeBoer and it was those guys. And I know on some level, I think there was like some level of relationship and offer, but it was a long stretch to get him to come to Washington or DeBoer, mainly because of the previous coaching staff. But with that being said, you're looking at Lance Holtzclaw and Jayden Wayne as the guys who I think were 4 and 5 or 5 and 6 in terms of edge snaps, behind Deshaun Lynch, Voight Nupi, Isaiah Ward. Right. And here's the reason why. Again, it's a loss because, you don't want to lose versatile talent. You don't want to lose potentially top elite talent. That said, we saw what Russell Davis was able to do in basically one game.
Yep.
But now, again, he had 3, and he is coming off an injury. Same thing with the interior guys, where we're talking about the Parker brothers, where, hey, if they come back healthy, this is insane, because then you have Durfee, you have Ward, you have Davis, you have Lane, and I'm already naming out 4 guys on a 5-man defensive front. So you're looking at limited snaps, plus Antonio Thompson, you can play a little bit of the 3-tech or kind of a little bit of both. But my point being is, you're looking at and saying, look, it's kind of similar to Thad, where it's like, look, if they want him to do one thing and he wants to go do another thing, and you're not going to find the same number of snaps, it's like, that's what the portal is there for. It's like, that's what we're talking. Now, if you're losing Durfee or Ward, this is a different discussion.
So I agree with you there. And again, it's still loss, but I look at this and I'm just curious about where you go from here, because this was an overabundance of talent at edge rusher, and just in terms of bodies especially, and now it's starting to get a little thin. And I'm just curious to say where. That's why I wanted to bring up Fisher K-Mac a minute ago, because if you're going to bring in a body, I like him where he's got that versatility that you're looking for. It's 6'7", 250, where you can play inside and outside. And I think that's a big part of this, is guys who can play all over the defensive line and just find a way to penetrate and get pressure. And that's moving forward. That's why, I mentioned Taitai Uyunglele. That's something he was able to do at Arizona. He was able to consistently get pressure. And you want to find more guys in that mold. I'm not saying Jayden Wayne can't. I think that it's one of those things where you look at him, and that's a moldable, projectable body type where, if he leaves, it's, I'd like to go be a bigger part of rotation, which obviously is not happening here right now, where you talk about Russell Davis, where we don't think he's going to have 3 sacks in a game again, because you just can't hold anybody those expectations. But you look at the room and you say, okay, bringing in some a bigger guy to help stop the run, going with more defensive tackles up front in Ryan Walter's scheme, which is going to have 3 down linemen at all times at the very least. And that's without including stand-up edge rushers, anything like that. It's going to be just as hard to find playing time for somebody like Jayden Wayne in 2025 as it was in 2024, which is just a likely scenario as to how this all went down. But Lars, let's switch gears here because we just watched a really fun basketball game, which we'll get right after message from our good friends over at GameTime. Attending the 12-team college football playoff games is an incredible experience that brings fans together like never before. I remember the excitement of past playoff games and can't wait to make new memories with the updated format and extra teams involved. GameTime has a new feature called GameTime Ticks that makes getting tickets for your favorite events even easier. It filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Recently, I used GameTime Picks throughout the baseball season to find tickets for upcoming games. Browsing through the deals was a breeze, and I found great value for all kinds of seats around the venue. The Super Deal in particular stood out as the best value for the event. I love that I can see the seat views before buying and that the app shows the total cost up front with no surprise fees to checkout, plus the on-time ticket delivery and lowest price guarantee gave me complete peace of mind. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download GameTime today. What time is it? Game time. Lars, that was a really fun basketball game that we just watched. Washington came out on the losing end, 81-77 against a really, really good Illinois team. And we wanted to just kind of do a recap. We've gotten some questions about, hey, you guys going to do more basketball? And yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a good way to just kind of kick this discussion off where we have seen the best and the worst of this Husky basketball team since the last time we spoke. We saw some big wins over Maryland. We saw them really have to gut it out early and then take over against Wazoo. We also saw them be down by as many as 17 today, and we saw them lose to Seattle U. So I think the message that I'm getting across here is there's been some inconsistency. But if we see moving forward, because there's some big games coming up, what we saw in the second half against Illinois, against Michigan State this coming week, hey man, this is a team that can make some noise.
Now, we do kind of have to preface it by saying, much like Russell Davis getting 3 sacks in the game, I'm not sure DJ Davis is going to be knocking down 7 out of 14 from deep. But again, it's one of those where because you have that talent, and DJ Davis was a guy who started early on in the season and then kind of went to the bench. And as Danny Sprinkle said after the game, he's kind of still figuring out who his 5 are. You basically put 5 pieces of dice with an initial on them, roll them out there. And he's like, that's how I can determine my starting 5, which is a good problem and a bad problem. A good problem because you have enough talent. It's like, hey, we got 7, 8 guys that could get the job done. The problem is nobody has done it consistently for 4 or 5 games, because he mentioned, I think it was, I don't know if it's your question or somebody else's, when he talks about the guard play. Like, hey, if we could get a consistent guard play for 5 games in a row. And I'm like, well, you didn't mention Tyree Inacho, but he's more on the defensive end. You still don't get a ton of scoring from him. So it's like you can get 1 on 1 half from one guy, and you're kind of mixing and matching. But like we see great Osobor today, it was like 9 points.
9 points, 4 rebounds, yeah. So I'm glad you mentioned that in terms of the consistency thing, because first of all, Zoom Diallo has really been impressive. He struggled today, went 3-12 from the floor. Looked like he got fouled there. Should have been at the line a couple more times. But because I asked Danny about Zoom after the game, and you look at the box score and you say, oh, he really struggled. And Danny was really happy with it. He said, yeah, that was a guy who was clearly taking great strides. Should have finished a couple more of those around the rim, but I was happy with the way that he played today. And even with great Osobor, he wasn't as mad as I'm sure fans on Twitter are with the box score. But Lars, one thing I got to say is, because we've seen some major inconsistencies in great Osobor this season. For somebody who came in with all the hype, there have been a lot of points this season where he's missing layups, doing just things that are extremely disappointing. But I have to say that there were a lot of points early on in this game where, especially after he missed a couple of shots early on, that I was really impressed with how he played defensively, where he was very aggressive. He came up, he finished this game with 4 steals. And it was something where he was attacking screens. He was getting over the top of them. He was getting his hand in there, and he was doing it without fouling, which was all really nice to see from somebody who's 6'8", 250. But I preface that to also just say we need to see more out of him. And I think the Frank Kepnong injury, which it's disappointing it's gone on this long, you hope to see him back sooner rather than later, where Danny Sprinkle kept pushing it out. He said, maybe mid-January is when we're going to see him. And I think that has hindered him on the offensive end of the floor. But for somebody who has come in with all the expectation that he has, it's not really an excuse.
Exactly, because now on some level, I think again, great isn't a 5. I think we can all agree.
He's not. You're right.
But at the same point, he can play the 5 in a smaller lineup, and Wilhelm with the 4 is kind of that it's not Wilhelm being the problem, but it's just kind of like, okay, Wilhelm can do a job, but he can only do a couple of jobs, and it's it is what it's good. It's a good service. Like, hey, you want one of those guys on your roster, but when that guy is now your starting 4 and great is your starting 5, and neither one of them are over 7 feet. When you look at matching up against Illinois, like it was like 46-30 in rebounds or something like that. Where it was not close. And now part of that you could say, well, again, yes, there's certain injuries and things like that, but that was just, there were some guys where the shorter guy in Illinois was going up over grading some of the other guys together, and I'm just like, what are we doing here? Like, and that's what we're driving at is. We don't want to, again, they're still 22, 23-year-old kids, those sorts of things, and you're still learning and things like that. But they are being paid and reportedly very well in Great's case. And so with that being said, that's kind of why fans have been, frustrated with the lack of production. And then, when we see like this is a game where you would think Great would take over, and instead it's DJ Davis, who we were talking about him as a nice player and a good piece as a veteran guard before the season, but nobody that is like, hey, balls in your hand, who do you want the last shot to be? DJ Davis or Osobor? It's like that's a different situation.
But I want to spin this conversation in a different direction when it comes to DJ Davis. This is the performance we were kind of waiting for from him at the same point, where I remember watching him on opening night and he goes 0 for 8. It was that's not what this guy is supposed to be. And we saw it continue for an extended stretch at the beginning of the season. And then as we've kind of gotten into Big Ten play, it looks like he's getting more comfortable. And we saw the best version of that today. Like make no mistake, this is the best version that we're going to see. I think he's very capable of having another 30-point game just from the way his skill set lines up and the way that this team is able to get shots for him and his range and different things like that. But this just adds an extra layer of the offense that you really hope can be capitalized on inside, where Danny Sprinkle went as far to say, hey, there were a couple of guys that early on in the game, Illinois was just straight up not guarding. And he was like, that was something we cannot have. And I'm quoting him when I say that. And that's something where he said that's what makes it harder on Great and different things like that. Because these are questions that you and I and other members of the media have been asking him all season long. It's when are we going to see just not only Great continue to assert himself, which I think he did very, very well against some good Maryland big men. I think he looked really good in that game. But then we saw that kind of fall back to earth, which is the most maddening thing about this team is there are the highs and then there are the lows. And it's been a real roller coaster ride throughout the first, however many games it's been, 15, I want to say. And moving forward, as we get into the meat of the schedule, where 4 of the next 5 games are coming against ranked opponents, like you need to find a way to make this work.
Yeah, well, it's why I was honestly impressed with the way they fought, because like you said, when they went down 17, this is one where it's like, this game could have been a 85-65 game in favor of Illinois, where it
could look like the USC game.
Exactly, and I think that was the positive takeaway for me. Which again, we can talk about how Great still needs to improve. We can talk about how the defense needs to do X. There's a lot of improvements that and Danny said as much after the game. But to me, it's okay. Good, you didn't have another USC performance. You didn't have another Seattle University performance. You're showing against better competition, even because I think Illinois is better than USC. Like I think that's
way better. That's a top 10, top 15 team in the country.
Exactly. And so you can kind of chalk the USC game up to just, sometimes it's not your night. But the fact that they're showing these competitive games, and you beat Maryland, because like we talked about before the show a couple of days ago, which was over that 7-game stretch, if I put the over under like 3.5, 2.5, 3.5, it's you had to get at least one this weekend, because if you can somehow find a way to squeak 2 and 2 over these next 4, like that's great, because but that's also going to rely on Great being great. It's going to rely on Tyler Harris reemerging. It's going to rely on Tyree Inacho continuing to have good defense and find some offensive production, and everyone just kind of playing their role, because we saw tonight how DJ was getting some of those open shots where guys were cutting and then kicking out. And it's like, and Lewis Courtwright coming along, same sort of thing where you're getting the veterans to mesh at the right time. It just seems like Great is kind of the last one to do it.
So I agree with you. There's one other name I want to throw in there, who's somebody who Danny Sprinkle is not afraid to call guys out and say, hey, I was really unhappy with the way this guy's played. And that's Makai Mason, where I feel that there have been points this season where he's been really impressive. You love to see the way he's shot the ball and everything. And he's another guy who, when he is in the starting lineup, when he's coming off the bench, whatever it is that he's doing, he can be somebody who can really change the game, because Danny has said it all season long, is especially since Frank Kepnang has gone down, they need to find a way to make shots from the perimeter in order to open things up for great. And today they made shots, but things were not open for him because Illinois played stellar defense on the inside. But when Makai is another guy's making shots, and it's not just DJ, I mean, the floor is spaced properly, Great will have plenty of opportunities to go to work. And then it's going to be on him to miss less layups and just continue to fight through it and just continue to improve from the free throw line, because that's one thing he's done really well all season, is get to the free throw line. And there's a lot to like despite the loss today, because I feel that we felt that from the way Danny talked, from the way the players talked. Is there have been some games where we talked to them where even after a win, they've not felt happy with their performance. Today, the vibe was very different, in my opinion. You correct me if I'm wrong, because I know we got to get out of here. And that's one of the things that I just want to end on, where you've got a real tough slate coming up, but the way that this team felt at the end of this game, it could have been a lot different. And I think we saw just a lot of things to be excited about moving forward. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you all everydayers tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. And thank you so much for making Locked On Huskies your first listen today, not for your second listen. Check out the Locked On Big Ten podcast. Our guy Craig Sheeman puts the Big Ten first. When everyone else overlooks it, you can find Locked On Big Ten on YouTube or wherever else you listen to your podcast, which is also where you can find this show. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, or there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel through content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you don't miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please give us 5-star reviews. It does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Tuesday.